Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everyone attending our webinar today. It looks like there are a lot of people signing on right now, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes and then we will actually get started. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. There are still a lot of folks signing on to this webinar. So what I'm going to do first is really talk a little bit about how the webinar is going to happen today. You should see on your screen when you signed in, you should see an actual slide that says RCD, make an informed decision. You should also have a control panel box that will allow you to ask questions using either a question box or a chat box feature. Today, we have several panelists with us who I will introduce in just a moment. But first, I'd like to go through a few other housekeeping details and also say thank you to our sponsor today. This is a very large call. We have a lot of folks on this call today. And so Cinzy agreed to sponsor this webinar. Cinzy is a virtual care communication platform which enables your staff to use HIPAA-compliant secure messaging, text, email, and video for your clinician to clinician and clinician to patient communications. Throughout the episode of Care, home health agencies use Cinzy's award-winning apps to engage patients with video-based virtual visits and condition-specific messaging. These additional touch points increase adherence, reduce the risk of readmissions, and enhance satisfaction for patients and staff. You may visit synzi.com, and that's synzi.com, to learn how your agency can provide cost-contained, patient-centric care, which will result in better engagement, better outcomes, and a better bottom line. So we do want to say thank you for Cinzy to Cinzy for sponsoring this webinar today. Next slide, please. All right, so thank you guys very much for joining us. We have multiple panelists here with us today. Besides myself, this is Rachel Hammond. I am the Executive Director for the Texas Association for Home Care and Hospice. We also have on the webinar today Hans Rickoff. He is with Aiken Gump, and he is the lobby group that represents the Texas Association for Home Care and Hospice in DC. We also have on the phone today Bill Dombi, the president of the National Association for Home Care and Hospice, who works closely with all of the states in forwarding advocacy for home care and hospice. We are also joined today by Sarah Radcliffe. She is the executive director for the Illinois Home Care Association, and Joe Russell, the executive director for the Ohio Council for Home Care and Hospice. So we really appreciate everyone being here today and coming together to be helpful in outlining some of the choices that you guys have to make over the next 30 days. Next slide. So what I'm going to do first is go through some basics on all of the different choices that you have in front of you and the timeline in which you need to make those choices. And then we'll go through some discussion with our panelists today. And then we'll also talk about the advocacy that we are doing. Because as you know, advocacy continues even though there are things that we have to do to comply with what we have in front of us. Before I get started, I just want to make sure as I introduce the panelists that everybody gets a chance to say hello. So Bill, if you would just say hello to everybody.
Good day to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you.
And Hans.
Good afternoon, everyone. And echo Bill's sentiment. Thank you for this opportunity. And I'm also here with another one of my colleagues, Kendall Hussey.
All righty. And Sarah?
Good afternoon, everybody. We are here to help and happy to be here.
Thank you. And Joe?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the wonderful world of review choice demonstration.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, thank you. And so we're just going to go ahead and get started. All right, so as you know, CMS announced on October 2nd that Texas would be going next in the review choice demonstration line up. We have 5 states that are participating. Illinois and Ohio have already started. North Carolina, Florida, and now Texas. We are starting with the actual choice portion of what we have to do to participate in this 5-year demonstration period. As part of that, CMS has stated that this is used to test these review choice options for home health services covered in Part A. CMS states it's their efforts to protect the Medicare Trust Fund from improper payments and to reduce appeals. As we know, appeals have been very problematic. They assert that the demo also would help to make sure that payments for home health services are appropriate and therefore prevent and identify the potential for fraud, waste, and abuse. And CMS also expects that creating a review choice process will ensure that Medicare coverage and documentation requirements are likely met. Next slide. All right, so review choice does not create and is not meant to create new documentation requirements that aren't already required for payment. Home health agencies will need to submit the same information that they're currently required to maintain for payment. The eligibility and benefits remain the same. One thing you need to keep in mind as we go through this process is that home health agencies that are currently under a UPIC review will not participate in the demonstration while they're under that review. However, it's really important to note that right now during this choice period, you should still make a selection. Next slide. All right. So some things to remember and some tips to remember is that the account administrator selected in the e-services portal is the only one that can make the selection for RCD. You will make your selection through the eServices online provider portal, and they encourage you to ensure that you have numerous backup administrators and encourage signing up backup administrators through that portal. Next slide. You need to also make your selection through the eServices online portal that we talked about earlier, and ask to select from one of those 3 choices, which we'll cover in a minute. And it's very important to read each of those options thoroughly prior to making your selection. And really, that's the basis of our webinar today, to really go through each of those choice selections and talk through what that might mean for you. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about the demonstration. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuances of each particular choice. We are going to be doing an actual training with Palmetto. And so I'm not going to cover how to actually implement PCR per se. However, if I do get questions to that effect today, we will forward that to Palmetto before our training in November. Our administrator conference is happening November 11th through the 13th, and Palmetto will be here to cover RCD on the 13th of November. So if you haven't registered for the administrator training, please get registered right away, because they will be here. And we'll be sure that any of the questions that are better suited for that training will be forwarded to them prior to that particular on-site training, so they'll be prepared to answer. All right, so each home health 60-day benefit period will be subject or reviewed under the review choice option chosen by the home health agency. Services for less than 60 days will still require the review under the demonstration, with the exception of LUPAs right now. However, as we know, that's changing when PDGM rolls forward. CMS has announced that LUPAs will also be subject to RCD. Each claim for the 60-day episode where the pre-claim review option was chosen but PCR was not actually submitted will be subject to prepayment medical review, and if payable, a 25% payment reduction. Next slide. Now, the timeframes are really important for you right now. Our selection period started on the 16th and will end December 2nd. Will end November 14th. Prior to the implementation date of December 2nd, 2019. It's very important during this 30-day period that you make a selection, but you can change your selection only during this 30-day choice selection period. If you do not make a choice by the November 14th deadline, you will automatically be placed in option 2, which is 100% post-payment review. Next slide. All right, so the 3 options. The first one being 100% pre-claim review, second being 100% post-payment review of all your claims, and then option 3 is minimal post-payment review with a 25% payment reduction for all home health services and the possibility of a recovery audit contractor review. And I would say that anybody who chooses this particular choice can pretty much count on a RAC visit. All right, so next slide. All right, so in option 1, there's a 100% pre-claim review. This really does amount to the least amount of paperwork if you think through it a little bit. I know there's a lot of things that you've got to get up front, and we'll talk about that in Illinois' experiences a little bit, but you know, the documents that you need to have up front are all your start of care documentation, your research documents if you're researching someone, and then it's important to note that you'll need physician signatures a lot sooner than you've had them before. Unlimited submissions or resubmissions are allowed for non-affirmed decisions prior to submission of the final claim for payment. So it's important to ensure that you resubmit if you don't get an initial affirmation. Keep going. Next slide. All right, so under 100% pre-claim review, non-affirmed pre-claim review determinations are not appealable. However, providers have the option of resubmitting the pre-claim review request before filing a claim, or submitting a claim which will be denied and then submitting an appeal. More than one episode of care may be requested on one pre-claim review request for a beneficiary, and claims associated with a provisionally affirmed request will not undergo further medical review except in those limited circumstances. Next slide. So note again, under 100% pre-claim review, those claims are also subject to all of the processing edits. And if all requirements are met and provisional affirmation is issued, payment will be made on the claim. There will be some nuances when PDGM comes on board as it relates to submitting a claim under PCR that we talked through. One of those is that you have to have a unique tracking number. Right now, there's only one, but when PDGM comes on board, you will need two. If a non-affirmed decision was made, Medicare will deny the payment on the claim, and then a denied claim based on a non-affirmation decision will constitute an initial payment decision, and the standard claims appeals process will apply. Next slide. So the second option is a post-payment review. 100% of claims are reviewed upon submission of the final claim under this particular option. So essentially what you're doing is that on every single claim, you're having to submit an additional documentation request. And we know how voluminous that is. You still have the 45 days to respond to the ADR. As you know, from a processing standpoint, it takes Palmetto a lot of time or some time to process those. So submitting that prior to the 45 days is always encouraged. But as you can imagine, holding up your payments or having to submit all of this information is quite a lot of work. They have 60 days to review and make a decision. If there's no response is received, an overpayment will be initiated. Next slide. All right, so this, again, is a lot of paperwork. The entire episode of documentation will have to be submitted. And through our experiences with TPE, we know how burdensome that is and can be. You'll need to obtain physician signature and dates on all your verbal orders prior to filing the final claim. And then all existing claims appeal rights remain unchanged under the demonstration in this particular option. Next slide. Now in option 3, this is the option where you have a minimal review. However, you have that 25% payment reduction on all payable claims. These claims are excluded from the TPE reviews. Providers who make this selection will likely receive a RAC review. And this, again, is a lot of paperwork. If you choose this option, it's something you will have to remain in for the duration of the demonstration. So it's definitely something to consider, and we wouldn't recommend making that particular choice. All right, next slide. All right, so there's also a process that we'll talk about, and This only applies after you've been through your first period. And Sarah, is that first period 6 months?
Yes, it's a 6-month review period, and then after the 6 months, they have a month to review and tell you what your affirmation or approval rate is. Then a 2-week choice period again, and then the next 6-month review period starts the following month. So there's like 2 months of kind of in between the 6-month review periods.
Okay. So these subsequent review choice options, when you are allowed to actually make that choice, again, are options for 100% pre-claim review. Option 2 is a selective post-payment review, or option 3 would be a spot check of 5% of your claims to ensure continued compliance. And we'll talk about some of Illinois' experiences in those subsequent review choice options, which are very interesting to making those kind of selections. Next slide. So as Sarah said, if the home health agency's full affirmation rate or claim approval rate is 90% or greater for a minimum of 10 claims, the request
below the 90%, then you have to go back to the initial choices.
Mm-hmm.
If you maintain 90% or above, you could choose from the subsequent choices of selective post-payment review or 5% spot check review. I will caution everyone, though, if you choose of the subsequent choices selective post-payment review, you are stuck in that for 5 years. So in Illinois, if agencies chose out of the subsequent choices, they overwhelmingly chose the 5% spot check of those choices or stayed in pre-claim review.
All righty. And so, in the subsequent review option 2, under that option is that selective that we just talked about, but one of the cautions is that would they remain there for the rest of the time if they chose yes?
Mm-hmm.
And so that selective post-payment review, once chosen either initially or at the 6-month period, then locks you into that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so that essentially is comparable to roughly 30 ADRs every 6 months for 5 years. Would you say that that's kind of what agencies would be going through if they chose that option?
That is what we have been told. We had less than 1% of agencies in Illinois choose that.
Okay. So there is a subsequent review option 3, which is a spot check. And essentially what that means for providers is that there's no reviews conducted other than a spot check of 5% of the home health agency claims during a 6-month period. That continued compliance is monitored throughout the selection of those 5% of the claims for the prepayment review. And then the home health agency can continue to select that option each 6-month period unless during that spot check phase it indicates that the home health agency is not compliant with Medicare coverage requirements, in which case the home health agency must again go back to one of the initial 3 review options. And so from the impact perspective, Sarah, on these subsequent reviews, in option 3, what would you say, is it comparable to kind of prepayment or kind of TPE if people were to check or to choose option 3?
Yeah, it's a post-claim prepayment review. It is a full ADR, so but they're only looking at 5% of the claims based. They'll take the total claims number from the 6 months before and say, okay, that's what your average is, and we'll take 5% of that for the number that they choose during the review period.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what their claims volume is, how many that they will choose.
Okay.
Whatever 5% is.
Right. And then if for any reason during that selection or during that 6-month period, if that review is revealing that they are having issues with those submissions, then they'll have to go back to picking one of the initial options of 1, 2, or 3.
Yes, if they maintain a 90% or above approval rate, then they can stay in the subsequent choices, but if they fall below that, they have to go back to initial.
Okay. All right, and so for those options that are evaluated every 6 months, the claims or the PCR requests reviewed during that 6-month period will determine essentially what comes next for providers. Providers will have to continue in their selected option during that evaluation period. the evaluation period, occurs during month 7. So as you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, there's a period of time in between the evaluation and when the next 6 months starts, essentially.
That's correct.
Okay. So in terms of the recommendations for review choice, obviously the best way to submit documentation is to use the e-services portal. Palmetto did put out some information to Texas providers in particular right after this announcement that states there are still a few Texas providers that are not on the e-services portal. It's exceptionally important for everybody to get signed up because submission any other way is highly inefficient and ineffective. In Illinois, would you say everyone's on that e-services?
Yes, and it is the only way that you can make a choice. So you have to sign up for e-services to make your choices, but yes, it is the best, fastest way to submit for pre-claim review.
Okay, so it looks like thankfully we're back up. So, obviously if you're not on to make that selection, then somebody else will make your selection, i.e. Palmetto or CMS, and you'll end up in 100% post-claim review. You can see here it's free, internet-based, and again, the easiest way to submit PCR requests and the best way to know that your claim has been received. All right, so next slide. All right, so some additional tips are here for you. There's a pre-claim review initial checklist and an FAQ that was updated in August. Has there been any additional updates that you're aware of, Sarah or Joe?
I checked it the other day and I haven't seen any updates.
Okay. And then there are some, if you have additional questions, there is an email box to utilize for those questions. There are monthly teleconferences that Palmetto does on RCD. And that next one that is coming up is November the 6th. Like I said, Palmetto will be on site with us. As you can see, in November at our administrators conference. It's really important to get signed up for that administrator conference. They will be there. We will also have presentations from Simeon on PDGM and the interface between PDGM and RCD as well, and then some budgetary considerations. So those are some tips that you should take into consideration as you are making your choices. Next slide. So right now we've been getting a lot of questions, and I know I wanted to just run through these slides fairly quickly so that we could get to the questions. There are a lot of people on the line. So before I get to some of these questions, I wanted to go to Joe really quick in Ohio. If you talk just a little bit about your providers' experiences in making their choices and selections.
Sure. So we don't have a ton of information just yet about exactly what the impact of RCD is going to be, but in terms of just the selection, what we saw is we did a lot of work at the association level to get people this type of information. Leading up to the selection date, we actually had 86% of our providers who chose pre-claim review, 13.5% chose the post-payment review, and then we had a very minimal 0.5% that chose the minimal review, with nobody choosing the selective post-payment or the spot check. Fast forward a few days after that until it was required, we ended up with 58% of our agencies at pre-claim review, and then we had 41% of the post-payment review. Now, what's important about this is 210 agencies did not make a choice, which means that they auto defaulted to choice 2. It's kind of, we speculated that a lot of these agencies didn't really know the full breadth of what they were selecting and also the time period that they were going to be impacted. We ended up with 1% in the minimal review, and we expect that those folks are going to be subject to focused scrutiny. Now, we did speculate that there could be one reason why an agency would want to do minimal review, and that would simply be because that they don't have very many Medicare claims at all. But even in those situations, we highly recommended to our members that they chose pre-claim review. We think that's with the least documentation, and in the long run sets these agencies up to succeed.
Absolutely. And so, Sarah, in Illinois' experience, because you guys have a lot and have paved the way for many of us, how would you say their choices are kind of falling out?
Okay, so Illinois, as you know, went through pre-claim review in 2016, 2017 until it was paused. So when RCD came back June 1st of this year, leading up to that, this is how Illinois made the choices. So because Illinois had experience with pre-claim review, if an agency had a 90% or above affirmation rate for pre-claim, they were eligible to choose from the subsequent choices, and we had many agencies that fell into that category. But even though they could have chosen a spot check, which was less review, 77% of the agencies in Illinois that made an active choice chose 100% pre-claim review. We had less than 1% choosing 100 post-payment review. 0 agencies chose minimal review. Less than 1% chose the selective post-payment of the subsequent choices, and 22% chose the 5% spot check. So why would you choose 100% pre-claim review if you could do just 5%, even if it's 5% ADRs? Well, this is why Illinois agencies chose this way. Many Illinois agencies did not change their processes from the experience of pre-claim review. They put processes in place that were more efficient. They had made the outreach to their referral sources, so the doctors knew that they needed to get their documentation to them timely. And so since they were set up that way, they just continued that because we knew it was a pause. We didn't think it would stop forever. So so a lot of agencies thought, well, we'll just keep this up, and that served them well. So agencies can make a change if you make a mistake under pre-claim review, and that's critical because we all make mistakes. We're human beings. Sometimes you leave off a piece of documentation, maybe something's not signed. Under pre-claim review, if you get a non-affirmation, you can go back, get the documentation you need, fix whatever clerical error there is, and resubmit to get an affirmation. And you can do that as many times as that is needed to get that affirmation. So Illinois providers really like that. And you will know early if you're likely to get paid for that patient. So that is another selling point for pre-claim review. The documentation required is less than what is required for an ADR. If you're under pre-claim review, you will not get ADRs. And it's a fairly quick turnaround on determination. So if you are using e-services and you submit your pre-claim review, the review time is about 3.5 days until you get your determination if you're affirmed or not. So that's a pretty quick turnaround, way quicker than an ADR. I will let you know this. Some of the agencies that chose spot check, that chose the spot check option because they were eligible to might have had a little bit of buyer's remorse. We've gotten some calls because reviewers haven't contacted them. That's another thing with pre-claim review. If you get a non-affirmation, a Palmetto reviewer will call you and talk to you about the reasons that you've gotten a non-affirmation. So we found that once that started with our previous pre-claim experience, then providers really understood better what kind of documentation they were looking for, and their affirmation rates start to skyrocket at that point. If you choose a post-payment review, any one of them, and the ones that chose the 5% spot check, they don't get those calls from reviewers. That's a regular ADR. There's no chance to change anything, and so that has become a little bit of a problem for some people. And here's a good example. We had one agency that had an employee make a clerical error on the same clerical error on 20 different claims that they sent. And because they couldn't change it, all of those claims were denied. So their only course of action is to appeal. That's one simple little error that if they had chosen pre-claim review, they could have made a change. So that's how Illinois has made their choices. So we'll see how they choose at the end of our review period, which ends November 30th for the next time.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's exceedingly helpful information, you know, as you guys contemplate, you know, why choosing the PCR is really one of the best choices to make, because there are things that can happen if making a different choice, obviously. So we have some questions that I wanted to run through, and I'm going to read these questions out loud for everyone as they've been submitted, and then you know, Illinois, Ohio, myself, or Bill can all chime in to answer these. One of the questions is related really to PDGM. Do we need, essentially, do we submit one PCR submission, or do we have to submit 2 times for each 30-day billing period? So at least from what we've been told by Palmetto, and Sarah and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they would submit 1 time and then receive 2 UTNs. Is that correct?
Yes. So you submit 1 pre-claim review for the 60-day episode of care, and in e-services, it's not up there yet because PDGM's not started yet. In e-services, you'll be able to select 2 UTN numbers that you will get. They've been told they'll be sequential, and you'll use 1 for the first 30-day billing period and the second one for the second 30-day billing period. You cannot use a UTN number on more than 1 billing period.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the next question is, will a signed or dated POC have to be submitted, or can a non-signed POC be submitted? And so it's my understanding that the documents have to be signed at the time they're submitted for pre-claim review.
Yes.
All right. And that's part of the reason that your processes are going to have to change quite dramatically in getting communication with the physician's office established, and ensuring that you get those documents back timely in order to submit the PCR. One of the things that we do have available for our membership, and we had some Illinois providers, thank you, Sarah, for you know, getting those Illinois providers here for Texas. And they presented some pre-claim review training for us over the summer that had a lot of very helpful operational tips in how to really operationalize PCR. That recording is still available. It's on our website. You can go to our website, click on HCIN, and that's where we keep all of our recordings. And so I would highly suggest going there and downloading that to get some operational perspective on how to actually implement PCR.
Yeah, Rachel, this is Bill. You know, in response to that question, maybe a sub-answer would be, you know, the agencies need to understand that they have to have all their face-to-face documentation fully prepared too, and that even if they submit a signed POC for purposes of pre-claim review, that doesn't negate the need to get signed change orders from the physician thereafter. It may not affect the pre-claim review at all, but it would be still necessary both to support a claim but to be compliant with the conditions of participation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a very good point, is that it doesn't change really those processes for agencies in terms of submitting the claim. So that's very important as well. Another question is in selection 1, which is PCR, are you able to submit your RAP while waiting for an affirmation?
Yes, I believe so. Let me follow up, because I never submit reps. Let me get an answer to that shortly.
And I agree with Sarah that you can submit RAPs while waiting for an affirmation.
Right, and I guess a follow-on question to that as well. And some of these, you know, again, I'll take these to Palmetto. So if we don't have an actual answer to some of these questions today, I'll take these questions that have been submitted to Palmetto, ensure that that we get those answered for everyone, and also have them prepared for their on-site training as well. So it says here, another question is, has CMS figured out how they are going to handle RCD claims where, if I'm not mistaken, the diagnosis on the RAP should match the diagnosis on the EOE, while the diagnosis on the PDGM RAP may differ on the EOE claim? That was a very big question. Bill or Sarah or Joe, do you have any idea on that one?
I'm going to admit ignorance on that one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, that was a tough one. So what we'll do is we'll take that one back, and I'll make sure I get that one to Palmetto for an answer.
Yeah, and just to mention that was a question we've talked to them about already. My understanding is that there is going to be situations in which that data doesn't match, but please don't take my word for it at this point.
Right.
I do think that in order to make these two things work together, there's going to need to be some flexibility, and I think this could be one of those areas.
Right. And as we know, that not all the questions related to PDGM and RCD and how those two things work together have been answered, quite frankly, by CMS or Palmetto. So the more questions we get in that regard, the better, which, you know, is one of the bigger reasons why, so close to PDGM, we are requesting a delay in the implementation, which we are going to talk about here in just a moment. I want to get to a couple more questions before we go on to our advocacy and some of the reasons why that's so important. Some of the other questions are, will the education from Palmetto only occur on November 13th in Houston, or will there be other locations or dates available? As it relates to RCD, we are going to have that face-to-face or that in-person education in November. We are working with Palmetto right now to also have some webinar-based, live webinar-based education in December, on multiple dates in December, because if Worst case scenario, this actually does roll out in December. There are going to be a number of implementation questions, I'm sure, and experiences where Palmetto and will be available to provide some additional education. I know they did that in Illinois and in Ohio. Is that correct, Sarah and Joe?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you say that a lot of the implementation questions were different, obviously, than when you guys were first going into the choice points?
Yeah, in fact, they're coming back. Palmetto's coming back next month to talk more. So right before they come to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that brings up some good points about advocacy. And I want to talk a little bit about advocacy right now before we go through some of the other questions that we've received. You know, what we are doing right now, obviously, we put out a lot of action alerts, and just so everyone knows, we have received, or a lot of folks have stepped up. There have been over 5,000 contacts, legislative contacts based on those advocacy alerts, and that's exceptionally important. And so this, Hans, would you talk a little bit about what CMS has heard, or what the effect of some of the advocacy has been so far?
Sure. Happy to kind of give an overview of that. First, just before we even start, I want to kind of sequence out what Rachel and the association has done, as she alluded to some of our advocacy. First, it was a surprise when CMS came out with the announcement that they were going to begin in Texas, especially in the month of December, when a lot of you are short-staffed, as well as 29 days before PDGM is set to take place, if it does take place. We were also surprised because CMS seemed to recognize the wisdom of pausing implementation for the remaining states of North Carolina and Florida. That said, as soon as the announcement was made, 2 days later, Rachel had sent a letter to Seema Verma, the CMS administrator, outlining all of our concerns and complications by this date of December 2nd. We also sent a letter to the entire Texas congressional delegation, bringing them up to speed on the issue and how Texas was not afforded the same pause as other states post PDGM. After that point in time, we had a call with CMS and the regulators, including those within the PDGM area, as well as within RCD. They had seen the letter, they had understood it. I think it was a productive call. I don't think they had fully appreciated some of the challenges with the December 2nd begin date for the state of Texas. We continue to have members of Congress, their staff, engage with CMS on that exact issue. Congress has made numerous calls and had several conversations directly with CMS on this issue. They've also done a number of emails, thanks in large part to all of the grassroots advocacy that's taken place by the association. So thank you for all of you that have reached out on this issue. I do think it is making a difference, and we need to continue with the momentum and keep our foot on the gas, as they say, with this effort. We've seen pauses in the implementation date or delays in the implementation dates in years past. Unfortunately, a lot of times that happens the day or two before they're set to go into effect. We continue to try to articulate to CMS the need to put out any type of announcement if they are going to make an announcement sooner rather than later. It is something you'll continue to probably see alerts on from the association as we continue to try to have CMS review this issue and hopefully come to a productive conclusion on for at least for the state of Texas on RCD. The letters that we've had from members of Congress have been good. We are also contemplating doing a larger sign-on letter from the entire delegation. There's certainly an appetite from a number of members to do that. One note is that the committees that have jurisdiction over CMS have been the most engaged, and that has been intentional by the association to have those members, both Republicans and Democrats, weigh in with CMS because they have jurisdiction over CMS. I think, again, it's been productive, and we will continue to do that until any type of official announcement is made. Kendall, I don't know if I'm forgetting anything else, but feel free to weigh in.
No, you did. That was great, Hans. And just thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of your very busy schedule to weigh in with members of Congress. It really does have an impact. Hans and I have been in contact with several members and their staff of the Texas delegation. They are constantly checking in with us, asking what the status is. So they're very interested. And of course, should CMS, decide to move forward, they are ready to kind of help us on next steps and Plan B with continuing to weigh in with CMS on our concerns.
And Bill, can you talk a little bit, about how CMS works and why we continue advocacy up until, and beyond implementation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and just note that we at NAHC are with you guys all the way on this. We've made our own direct contacts to CMS and to congressional offices, and we've had a little bit of experience in this with pre-claim review back in 2017. And with that experience, we know you have to keep the heat on your both CMS and your congressional delegation until a decision is made, and who knows, maybe even after that. As we were advocating for the elimination of pre-claim review in 2017, Florida was scheduled to roll out with pre-claim review on April 1st, and it was not until March 31st that CMS actually made a decision. That indicates that you may find CMS taking it up to the limit again this time. So don't lose faith in the process that we have ongoing. I think all the pieces are in place for a favorable outcome, but you need to be cautiously optimistic, and you need to continue to connect in with your congressional delegation, and we continue to connect in with CMS to inform them as to the validity of the request to postpone it, the common sense behind it. So I think Rachel, we're in pretty solid shape, but today is April 17th, and that still leaves nearly 6 weeks before December 2nd, where people might be sitting on the edge of their seat. I would add one other thing. The Florida providers did not just sit there hoping. They did get prepared as well, and fortunately, it was pulled back at the last moment.
And that's a very good point, Bill, and I appreciate you making that. That is why we're, doing this webinar today to talk through the choices, having Palmetto on site or in person at our administrator conference, bringing them back for additional webinars and training. All of those things are very important to continue forward with, to be prepared in the event that this actually does go forward. But from the advocacy perspective, it's also very important to keep our foot on the gas. And so for those individuals who have not reached out to their legislative representatives and senators yet, it's important to do that. It does make a difference, and CMS has heard that there has been a lot of legislative outreach and a lot of noise made about this particular issue. The other big piece to advocacy is really just the ongoing advocacy from the implementation side. Many of as Illinois and Ohio kind of pave the road for anyone that goes after them, in this case Texas, there's a lot of things that they're doing now to make things better for any subsequent provider that rolls on. So for instance, is Sarah, I think you were telling us just the other day of an interpretation that some of the reviewers were having. Can you talk about what you did with Palmetto to correct that misinterpretation?
Sure. So we had an instance pop up where a couple providers alerted us that some reviewers were non-affirming because every page of the plan of care wasn't signed. Well, that's not something that ever had to be done before. As long as it was signed once and you could tell it was one document, that was enough. So because we've established a good working relationship with Palmetto, I immediately tapped those resources and said, listen, this seems like signature overload to us. And they agreed and did reviewer education. And so we were able to get them to reverse decisions that way. So we have found that in a lot of cases they do listen to us. We had right after the beginning, or a month or so after the beginning of RCD, we had a focus group with some of our Illinois providers and Palmetto to suggest changes to the e-services portal to make it more efficient, because the more efficient we can make it, the more money providers will save. So they have been responsive to a lot of our suggestions and also to our requests for change.
Absolutely. And that's really important as these things roll out. So I wanted to go back to some of the questions that we have received to get through some of those questions. There's been a lot of kind of repeat questions that we have received. One of the questions is, will we still be required to participate in other pre-claim review demonstrations during this period? I'm not exactly certain what that question meant, but
Rachel, it's possible they're asking, will they be subject to any other reviews like the probe and educate audits and such during the program? And the short answer is they will cease the other programs once the reviews start, at least for those that have chosen a pre-claim review approach. There still remains audit possibilities from UPICs, or for that matter RACs, because their jurisdiction extends into fraud, but by and large their routine audits should end. Although, Sarah, I think you saw some Illinois providers who had to get themselves out of the other audits.
Yes, but not a whole lot.
So another question, is there any new law for physicians to sign documents in a timely manner, or an old law I don't know about? There's nothing, at least in Texas state law, that has a particular timeline for physicians to sign orders. And so, and I don't believe that there's federal law either. They're really governed by their Practice Act, and particularly in Texas, there's nothing that addresses that. Unless there's something.
There is no law that does that. But Sarah, didn't the Illinois providers find some, techniques to get doctors to get on a more earlier schedule, because it ultimately ended up more efficiency for the physicians too, I believe, in Illinois.
Yes. So one of the things that we did in Illinois is we reached out to our Illinois State Medical Society and provided them with some information and education for their physicians, so that they could become more aware of what RCD is, or pre-claim review is, and what's required. A lot of it is making sure that you have relationships with your referral sources. The most successful agencies are the agencies that went to their referral sources and explained what pre-claim review was, what documentation is needed, why it needs to be there timely. And so it can be kind of a heavy lift, but once they understand that, and you've got that good working relationship, it becomes a lot easier, which will probably be helpful under PDGM as well.
Absolutely. We've had several questions about the demonstration itself. You know, did the 5-year demonstration start over again, or does the last time period count? So I guess that's in reference to the first time PCR rolled out, and it rolled out in 16 and I think ended in 17. And so did any of that time in PCR count toward the demonstration that we're currently in, i.e. RCD?
No.
No, I know. I was going to say no, and I think, Bill, you would agree with that, no?
Yes, I mean, CMS had to go back to the Office of Management and Budget for clearance when they came with the review choice demonstration program. So I believe they're reading it the same way we are, which is the clock has started over on the demo. The reality being they really like it, so they could always get an extension from OMB no matter what. You know, OMB actually is probably best described as the instigator of review choice demo, not just simply a clearance party. We understand that one of the upper officials at OMB specifically told CMS that they had to start it again. So, you know, technicalities aside, I think one would have to say review choice demonstration program is here for probably the current lifespan of many of us working in home care, so long as the return on investment remains, because it comes with a fairly significant price tag of $400 million. And CMS is definitely, though, believing that its return on the investment has been shown in Illinois and maybe soon to be shown in Ohio. So we don't see them backing away from it. Again, technicalities don't matter much.
Right, and that's really related your answer to a follow-on question. Will it end in 2021 for Texas? And from what I heard you say and what we're hearing pretty much is that they would actually like to expand to RCD, you know, beyond the demonstration.
Yeah, I mean, they have authority within the demo to expand it into all of the states within PGBA, and can easily get authority to expand it everywhere. CMS and the White House has made it clear that they like prior authorization. And so, you know, you're going to see a culture focused on that type of program integrity measure continue, possibly expanding in home health across the country and possibly expanding outside of home health. As Sarah's aware, in Illinois, the annualized impact of the first generation, that being pre-claim review, was $100 million lower spending in the state of Illinois. We can't specifically say it's completely connected to pre-claim review, but it just seems a little too coincidental that it was concurrent with pre-claim review. So that tells CMS budget people, as well as program integrity people, that it's working. At the same time, if we can get the level of non-covered claims down, they could determine that the expense is not worth it. It has the improper payment rate has dropped to around 17% from a high of 59%. So it is possible. I'll offer one last word relative to even the improper payment rate. North Carolina was selected as a target site for this demonstration program, and its improper payment rate is probably the lowest of all the states where PGBA does claims review, and they were still selected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it appears, you know, that this is something that they do want to continue, obviously, and actually expand. There's some other questions as it relates to Part B, as to whether is this applicable, or RCD process applicable to Part B home health claims. It's my understanding no, but would you agree with that? I
mean, yeah. Part B home health claims and Part A home health claims are really considered one and the same today. So it's applicable to all home health claims.
Okay.
You know, it's not applicable to outpatient services that a home health agency might provide for therapy services. or separate and distinct DME claims, but home health A and B are included. Medicare Advantage is not included.
Okay, so I might have misunderstood the question. I was assuming it was kind of the 34X type of bill, you know, the outpatient therapy type, which it would not be applicable to.
Correct.
Okay, okay. So some of the other questions related to choice, let me see here. Let me see, what's the difference? It's, well, no, I don't have any other ones related to choice. I think a lot of them are really implementation questions. Do we have 10 days from start of care to submit the PCR? That's more of an implementation question. So Sarah, from an implementation standpoint.
Well, it's going to vary, and you don't have, I don't think you have to be within 10 days. I mean, you can submit it when you want, but
right.
you know, you want to get it out as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Palmetto has 10 days to give you a determination on your pre-claim review for the first submission.
Right.
If you get a non-affirmation, you resubmit, they have 20 days to respond to you. So getting it submitted to Palmetto as early as you can helps for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to a question that was asked a long while ago, can you submit RAP before you get your PCR determination? My resident guru board president says yes, you can.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. All right. So in the time that we have left, I want to cover a few questions. There's a lot of questions on here that we can submit directly to Palmetto and that Palmetto will be addressing in their training that is really related to implementation. But there are some questions on here related to where you can find some of the information as to whether or not we'll have the slides available. Yes, we will have the slides available. We will post that on our website for everyone who attended the webinar today. You can go out to our website. It'll be www.tahch.org. And we will be sure to post the slide deck that we had today so that people can download that information as well. And then we will also send out information related to, and you can see here, our website and where you can ask additional regulatory questions. That's also available. And then we'll have a site dedicated only to RCD that will have all of the information kind of in one place. Some of the things that have been done in other states that have been very helpful, and I didn't want to let this webinar go by and not talk through some of those things. Illinois and Ohio, I believe Illinois, you guys did weekly chats. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the first time around, we did weekly chats. Bill, Dombi, and I hosted those, and it was a good way for us to disseminate timely information and any changes that there were, because there were a lot at the beginning in 2016. And so it was also a good way for us to find out how things were going from providers, and also providers helping each other with how to make it work, or have you tried this, or you need to do that. So it was a great forum for mutual understanding, for us to get information out, for us to get an idea of how things were going in the field so we could use that in our advocacy. This time around, we've had chats maybe about every 3 weeks or so. The implementation in Illinois is going a lot smoother than it did the first time around, but we have experience. So I suspect that you all will have lots of questions as you get started. And
Yep.
Bill, do you want to add to that?
No, I think it was a two-way street of value on the chats too. I mean, we as your representatives, both at the state and national level, were able to then interface better with CMS to try to correct things that look to be systemic. And if I recall, one thing in particular that ended up making just a tremendous difference was when we were able to convince CMS that in looking at the entire healthcare record, they would see a different picture than just looking at the physician's record, and that then changed their process a bit and ultimately led to a change of the rule while they still looked just at the physician's record to start with. And this was probably one of the biggest learning parts of the chat discussions, that when agencies started having a more detailed plan of care to focus on homebound status and skilled care need, it then really helped to reverse the trend towards non-coverage into affirmations across the board. So, if you choose to go ahead with chats in Texas, you can certainly count NAHC in to be there as part of it, but recognize the two-way value. You will get a lot out of it, but so will we in terms of our ability to help you.
Absolutely. And for us, we'll definitely have the opportunity for weekly chats as well, and provide that opportunity for members as we roll this out, as it rolls out in Texas. In the event, hopefully, that it's delayed, obviously we're going to continue our advocacy related to a delay, but in the event that it's delayed, we'll start those chats once it is implemented. Hopefully, I'm keeping fingers crossed that we will see implementation in March rather than in December. Can everybody still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And so, Joe, I might have missed because my phone cut out just a little bit. In terms of what you guys are doing ongoing for members.
Yeah, so our weekly chats are going to begin here next week, and we're hoping to do the same thing, is to get more real-time information out to our folks, but also to get some more real-time on the ground information back. So we're looking forward to that. We did what you guys are kind of doing, and we did the Palmetto Road shows throughout the state of Ohio to get people quote unquote trained. We have also been sending out information via our weekly bulletin. We've made available our RCD toolkit, and then we've continued to have different presentations at our big event. So right now we're sort of in just the information phase where we've gotten a lot of stuff out, and now we're just sort of in a holding pattern. They say that no news is good news, but when it's completely silent, it makes you worry. So that's kind of what we're up to right now.
Right. And I think right now it's being so early, it's our understanding that it's roughly been about 40 pre-claim reviews, actual submissions at this point.
Yeah, I did get an email this morning that one of our agencies did say that they've gotten their first claim affirmed, so that's really good. It's a good sign. People are definitely excited about that. But yes, there hasn't been a whole lot of volume whatsoever. We've been specifically reaching out to people to ask, and they have said that they're going to get back with us by the end of the week, which is obviously tomorrow. So I'm really hoping that come Monday, I'll have a much better picture of where things stand.
Absolutely.
Rachel, I would offer something too. Even though you cannot get into e-services early to practice, Palmetto does have a paper form on their website that follows the same process flow. So if agencies want to kind of get a sense for what the e-services looks like and where they're going to have to submit or attach things, that might be something good to just kind of take a look at and see how that it really kind of goes along exactly with the e-services submission, and we found that to be a pretty good tool as agencies prepare.
Absolutely. And being prepared right now, one, by making the appropriate choice, and then two, practicing, I think, is important as much as feasible. Are there any other tips that you guys can give in preparation as agencies move through these choice points? Other items that you guys have seen helpful to your providers in your states?
Well, we kind of break it down to three areas. So it's relationships, the relationships you have with your referral sources and getting out and educating them early. It's processes, really taking a hard look at your processes, who does what and how long does it take, and then making some efficiencies there. And then your documentation and really making sure that what you are submitting paints the full picture for home health. So getting that really robust, telling that story of that patient is huge. So making sure that you've got measurable goals on your plan of care, and you're really telling the story. And I said the other day to some other providers at the NAHC conference, you're telling the story to someone who doesn't know that person. So you have to describe that person fully and their condition fully so that they understand why they're getting home health.
And so for Texas providers right now, I want to hit one last question and then really review some things with you that you can do right now to get ready. The one last question that I have here is, so Illinois, any idea how many agencies closed or reduced secondary to implementing PCR RCD?
During the pre-claim review period of August 2016 through March 2017, we had roughly 57 agencies close in Illinois. Some could have been because of pre-claim review, could have been other reasons too. We're not sure what the reasons are. We have had a lot of mergers in Illinois in the last couple years. So I think we were at the beginning of 2016, so January of 2016, way before pre-claim was announced, we had roughly 800 Medicare certified agencies in Illinois. Today we're around 620 in the fall of 2019. Our Department of Public Health tracks those numbers, and I've asked them if they know why they've gone down, and their answer is because of competition in the Chicago metro area. I think it's a variety of factors. I think some have exited. Some may have exited because of RCD. Some may be exiting because of PDGM. And we've had a lot of mergers and acquisitions.
To give it just a little bit more context, typically what was happening in Illinois when we looked at it was you were seeing the closure of 30 or more agencies a year. And with the moratoria that was on in Illinois, they weren't being replaced. So clearly pre-claim review and maybe now RCD has had some impact, but it is the 57 agencies that left, probably half of them would have left unrelated to that. So it's impacting, there's no doubt about it. But one other thing to put on balance, and this can be, you can confirm this, Sarah, there were some agencies who actually increased their business during that time because they found, an efficient and successful path under pre-claim review.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So, and if you talk to Illinois agencies, a lot will tell you, even though it was a painful process, it made them better as an agency. And for some, their referrals went up because of it.
And that's really the point I was trying to make with that. The question was asked, but really wanted to put providers, aside from the timing, which we know is really, really poor timing and why we're pushing so hard, you know, from an advocacy perspective to push this back, the overall process, if you were to take the very poor timing out of the equation, the overall process for RCD, i.e. pre-claim review, which is the large majority of the choices, has not necessarily been as bad as initially thought. Would you characterize that overall to be correct?
Yes, and I would say it's not as bad as it was at the very beginning.
Right.
There was a lot of hard work done at the beginning of pre-claim review to make it less burdensome, and on agencies' parts, of course, on Palmetto's part and on our part. So it is not as bad as it was. Does it take some time? It does take some time, but it could be a lot worse.
You know, one thing I think the Illinois providers learned with pre-claim review is that they went into it thinking they were doing everything right, and they found out that they were not. So it required them to kind of revisit their base knowledge, not just to fine-tune some things. And we would hope that the Ohio, as well as the Texas people and anybody else, kind of cleans the slate of presumptions regarding knowledge on compliance, because, you know, most home health agencies haven't been tested on compliance with much other than a claim here and a claim there. And just like in Illinois, they found out that when claims were subject to 100% complex reviews, that there were things they should have known that they didn't know. So a little humility going into this would pay dividends.
Absolutely. And so overall, as we wrap up the call today, there are things that you can do now to be prepared. Obviously, making a good choice. I think you've heard today from the different states and from Bill and from us that the pre-claim review option overall is the best option initially going in to this process. So, you know, as you make your choices, be very thorough in researching what might work best for your agency. There might be an agency or two out there who may not do that many or might not handle that many Medicare patients. Maybe they're primarily a Medicaid agency and really just primarily handle Medicaid and then only occasionally do you know, pre-claim or Medicare. So in that case, it might be the best option for that particular agency to choose post-payment review. But that is definitely a business choice that each individual agency is going to have to make. The next thing is, you know, attend the trainings. We will again have additional trainings. We provided a lot of training early in the year, not early, midsummer actually, where Palmetto did come along with some Illinois providers. We, like I said, still have the recording of the providers. Palmetto doesn't allow us to keep the recordings of those trainings up any more than 30 days at a time. So the only way to see Palmetto again as it relates to RCD in Texas is to either come to the training in person or attend their webinars monthly, and we will continue to have trainings with them specific to Texas RCD even after that November date via webinar, etc. So again, go to our website. That's www.tahch.org to sign up for the administrator training if you want to come see Palmetto live. And then we will have additional trainings with them via webinar as well, even in December. And we'll continue that through next year as well, because there will be a whole new set of challenges, as we know, with PDGM. Is there anything additional any of our panelists would like to say before we end the webinar today?
I would just say good luck, lean on your association. They're there to help you, and you'll get through it.
I would echo the same thing. Rachel, thanks for bringing this together. And I think I know in discussing things with Rachel that they've got their arms as firmly around this as one could possibly have. And so I know that they're going to be with their Texas agencies every step of the way. So there is help. So please take advantage of that help.
Thank you. And, again, thank you everyone who attended today. Thank you panelists for being here today and really being helpful to everyone during this process. And keep an eye on our website and our newsletter. We will, be putting out information. If you guys are members, of course, we're very active as well on our forum. So, I encourage you, if you're not a member, to consider membership as well, because you'll have access to all of those additional resources as this process moves forward. So thank you guys for being here today, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.